Okay, today's public service announcement is related to overspending in California and the loss of value to its residents from the overspending that the state does. And so, what we did is we went to the U.S. Census Bureau and we found data where the census collects spending by state that includes the state government spending, county government spending, and city government spending, and they aggregate it. And they produce the tables, and the latest available data is 2022. So we took the spending, the combined spending per state, and then divided the population for each state into that spending to come up with spending per resident. And so for California, for each resident of the state of California combined, again for the state, counties, and cities, spends $18,142 per resident. And then we compare that to the national average. If you take all states, all spending for states, doesn't include any federal money. This is just state, county, and city spending, and divide it by the population. The national average is $13,108. And then we also looked at some red states here. We looked at Texas. They spend $12,816 per resident. Arizona, $10,665 per resident, and Florida, $9,875 per resident. So we said, okay, well, let's compare California to each one of those and measure the loss of value to each of the residents if the state of California is spent at the national average or at Texas, Arizona, and Florida. So here's the calculation. You basically take and this is the calculation for California versus the national average. So California spending per resident is $18,142. We took then the national average at $13,108 per resident. And the savings of California spent at the national average, at the lower of the national average, we would save $5,034 per resident. And so you take all the population, the number of residents in the state of California, which is about 39 million, and you multiply it by that $5,000 per resident savings. That would be per year. The residents of the state would save in expenditures $200 billion, just $196 billion, if you round that up to $200 billion. That's how much they would save per year, and the state could either lower taxes or remit that money to its residents. So if you think about that savings per year as like interest coming off of a savings account or a bond, and then you think about what a fair interest rate would be, a market-based interest rate. I've just picked a 30-year Treasury bond rate of 4.8%. You can say, okay, that interest of about $200 billion at 4.8% interest, how much would you need to deposit into a savings account, or how much would you need to buy a bond for that would produce at 4.8% interest rate, interest of about $200 billion a year? Well, the answer is you'd have to deposit about $4.1 trillion into that savings account to earning 4.8% interest to get interest of $200 billion a year, or the savings that the state of California would achieve if they'd limit their spending to the national average. So that overspending costs the residents of California a combined total of a $4.1 trillion loss in value. And so I put that on this chart here. So if you compare California to the national average, if California spent at the national average, which they don't, the residents are losing a combined $4.1 trillion loss of value at a 4.8% interest rate. And we make that same calculation if California spent at the rate that Texas spends. That's a $4.3 trillion loss of value. Same for Arizona, make the same calculation. That's a $6 trillion loss of value. And then also, if California spent at the rate that Florida spends, the residents of the state are losing $6.7 trillion in value. So the overall range for this little exercise that we've gone through is $4 trillion to $6.7 trillion loss of value, because the state of California spends at a much greater rate than the national average or than some of our red state peers. So you can check my work. Here's the sites for where I got the data for the state and local government spending, and then also the population data. Give me a comment and let me know what you think.